Good morning and welcome to our webinar today on backup and disaster recovery. My name is Joe Deely and I'm Technical Services Manager and Product Manager for Cloud Services in Mhance. I have my colleague beside me here, Richard Carrick, who's our lead consultant for all cloud services. Before we begin, I'd like to review a few simple housekeeping items. We expect the webinar to last approximately 30 minutes. Please note that the presentation is being recorded and will be available to view on demand. All participants are set to listen-only audio mode and will remain so for the duration of the webinar. If you have a question, click the question button on the right-hand side of your screen. In the new pane that opens, type your question in the top box and click Ask. Do feel free to submit your questions at any point during the presentation, and we'll answer each one offline after the webinar. Thank you. With all the recent news with GDPR, I'm sure you've all heard how important it is to protect an organization's data, and particularly personal data. Unfortunately, some organizations only really put an emphasis on this when they experience some type of disaster resulting in data loss. The impact to the business can be financial, lost productivity, or loss of reputation. In extreme cases, a business may not recover from it. The first step in preventing any data loss is obviously to back up your data, but there's just some basic must-dos that all businesses should have covered. Here's just a list of those basics. We have antivirus and anti-malware protection. Really important to have a solution covering both of these to ensure you're protected against new forms of attack within spyware and adware, as well as the traditional virus types such as Trojan, worms, etc. Really it's not enough to have free antivirus programs in this day and age, particularly when you see all the things about ransomware going around. Regular backups seems pretty obvious, but not just checking that they've completed successfully, but actually testing the restores. We've had some customers who've only realized they've had an issue when attempting to restore after a disaster. Have a password policy in place with minimum character length with alphanumeric and special characters. Educate your users about the risk of suspicious URLs and unsolicited email. That's often how people are getting affected with ransomware. We even had an instance there where somebody contacted us that they'd got an email asking them to put in their Office 365 credentials to open a document. So it's really important to educate your users about things like that. Mail protection. Spam filtering should be standard now. If you're using Office 365, use the tools available in there. And the last one is disaster recovery plan. Every company should have one in place and test it regularly and refine it. So to assist customers with protecting the data, we're going to talk about some services we're offering to our customers which leverage Azure. The two we're going to concentrate on today are around backup and disaster recovery. Richard will discuss some of the features and benefits around Azure backup and Azure site recovery. So I'll hand over to Richard now. Thank you.
Good morning, all. Before I go into the specifics of the Azure backup tools that we're going to look at today, I just wanted to do a quick review of some of the main themes related to backups. The two obvious ones being backups and testing itself. So when having a backup solution in place, it's imperative to have a plan of how your backup's going to work. You also need to make sure that you can have on-site and off-site storage copies. If you have a disaster with your on-site environment, be it disk failures, buildings burning down, or anything like that, you need to be able to have off-site copies of your data to be able to recover. One of these tools is to have retention. And And if you can have retention of multiple copies of your data, you can protect yourself against things like ransomware attacks, where you're going to have a copy of your data that's been untouched by the ransomware, kept off-site, and was taken prior to the attack. This allows you to be able to recover from such attacks without having to go through a lengthy process of absolutely rebuilding everything from scratch. As part of a solid backup plan, a restore policy needs to be in place. This requires doing regular testing of backups that are taking place. So as you'll probably get notifications of successful backups, but this in and of itself is not enough to ensure that the data that you've backed up is available to be restored in case it's required, be it simple file restores or complete server, VM, database, exchange, etc. restores. So the testing of these backups is critical on all levels, be it on file levels, database levels, and entire virtual machines, if that's what you have on premise yourself. Another issue related to backups is the physical media required to do the backups itself. This can be traditional tape device backups, where you have the tape drive itself and the tape media. You need to have a selection of tape medias to be able to have retention policies, or even kind of newer types of storage backups, be that SAN boxes or NAS boxes, where you back up your data off your main servers onto an extra storage component sitting within your network. Obviously, all these types of physical media require maintenance and upkeep. Physical tape drives can break, can need cleaning, can just stop working. Tapes themselves can, although usually reliable, can have problems. If you come back to a tape a number of years later to restore a piece of data, it may not necessarily work. And again, with the NAS and SAN storage options, disks need to be maintained, that the monitoring needs to be on those storage devices to make sure that they maintain their integrity. So looking at the Azure backup feature, this can look to help with those backup plans, testing plans, and the backup device questions that I've just mentioned. So Azure Backup is a service that backs up data from on-premise machines and Azure VMs. Data can be backed up and recovered at a granular level, including backups of files, folders, machine system states, and application-aware data backups. Azure Backup handles data at a more granular level than site recovery, which we'll look at later. Azure Backup allows you to do backups of your on-premise data, as I said, files, folders, databases, etc., directly into an Azure storage platform. This can be done via an existing DPM or Data Protection Manager product from Microsoft, or the Microsoft Azure Backup Server with agents running on the machines that you want to do. Both of these options are application aware for SQL, Exchange, SharePoint, etc., as well as standard files, folders, and can incorporate full physical or virtual machines, including Linux boxes. When doing backups, it can be helpful to keep a local copy of a backup available, specifically around SQL databases, etc., to allow for a kind of quick and easy restore. But it's also important, as mentioned, to have an off-site storage capability for your backup features. And Azure Backup and backing up into the Azure storage platform allows for that off-site copy to be kept. And Azure allows to keep multiple copies of data within its storage platform. So you can look at having retention policies in place to hold days, weeks, months, or even years worth of data within the Azure storage platform, depending on the requirements of your business. So there's no need to have tapes stored away in third-party storage facilities for 5-7 years. That data will be available to you almost instantly on the Azure Backup platform itself for recovery when and if required. Replication of that backup data is also available for high availability. This can be set up prior to the backup feature being activated, and it just gives that extra added layer of comfort and security to know that should, in the extremely unlikely event of a problem in a particular Microsoft Azure data center, should there be a problem there, that copy of the data is also kept on a secondary data center so that it will still be available to you. So it gives you that extra level of kind of comfort and security to know that you're there. Also, all data that gets passed up into the Azure backup environment is compressed and encrypted on backup and transfer. This includes local Azure platform data and on-premise platform data, where you can set up in a secure encryption key that only you would know as the holder of that key, to be able to decrypt that data should you require to restore it back to your on-premise environments. So therefore you have compression for minimal use of storage and encryption for security, to know that the data you have backed up within Azure is safe and cannot be attacked or taken by anybody else. So what do these benefits give you within the Azure backup? And the main ones being that it meets any compliancy that you may have with requiring to holding your backups off-site. As we said, financial data or data of a sensitive nature would need to be kept off-site for X number of years, depending on what requirements there are for your business. And that data needs to be secure but easily available to you. Storing it in the Azure storage platform reduces the need for physical hardware costs, so you don't have any need for tape drives, tapes themselves, cleaning equipment, storage area networks, NAS boxes. Any physical storage that you may have on premise for doing backup would not be required when backing up into the Azure platform. As long as you have an internet connection with the ability to transfer data up, that's all that's required. Again, the cost of transporting the data up is free. Moving data into the Azure storage platform does not cost. There's no need to have physical transportations of tapes, people collecting them at the evening and bringing tapes back in the morning, or if you need to get your hands on a tape from a week ago where some critical file's been deleted accidentally, you don't need to ring up a courier service to go and collect that tape. That data is available to you there and then to be able to be restored quickly and easily back into where it's required. As mentioned, Azure Backup can do both on-premise servers and Azure servers. So this gives you the flexibility to have potentially a hybrid environment where you have some of your services running on local on-premise servers, be they Windows servers or Linux servers, and also have some of your platform running within the Azure stack itself. And doing Azure Backup allows you to consolidate all those backups into a kind of single area where you can keep an eye on everything that's going on and can be monitored from there. And as mentioned, the data within the Azure's backup storage is available to you whenever it's required. There's no waiting or no retrieving or nothing of that kind. Once you want to go and restore files from backup, all you have to do is kick off that process. Those files will be there for you and can be restored back down to your on-premise or into your Azure environment, whatever is required at the time. I'm just going to hand you back to Joseph for a second.
Right. In addition to protecting your data, you also need to make sure you can recover your applications in the event of a disaster. Azure Site Recovery is a service that allows for the setup and test of your disaster recovery solution. You can replicate on-premise VMware and Hyper-V virtual machines and physical servers to Azure to stay available if the primary site goes down. Richard will just discuss some of the features and benefits in more detail.
Thank you. So disaster recovery is a major topic that a lot of companies don't necessarily pay enough attention to. The two main aspects of disaster recovery, similar to backups, is having a plan in place and testing that plan on a regular basis to ensure that your disaster recovery is what you want it to be. So as mentioned, it's essential to have a plan. If no plan's in place and a disaster strikes your business, a time can be wasted deciding what the next steps should be. Whereas if a formal, organized plan has been put in place, that plan can be kicked off at any sign of a disaster, and the process can start moving quickly towards a resolution and getting your company back online. An essential part of that plan is to test it. Failure to test any kind of disaster recovery plan means that when you go to implement it, it may not work as expected. And again, time could be lost trying to recover data, trying to get hardware, or put all the things that are required in place so that your business can be back up and running. And occasionally what can happen is parts that were deemed unnecessary during the initial planning phase turn out to be critical and can be lost. And so that can cause problems. So testing and refining the plan on a regular basis is absolutely critical to any sort of disaster recovery that a company wants to have in place. We've had examples before of customers who've had either attacks or hardware failures. They've gone to restore data and found that the tapes or the restore devices weren't working as expected. The backups hadn't completed as they had planned. They had done no testing and were in a position where they may have had to recover data from 6-8 weeks previously, which means there's a loss of business time and energy and effort in trying to recover all the data back up to the point of disaster itself. So again, I know I'm probably repeating myself a lot on this, but critical to have a plan, and it's critical to test that plan. So Azure Site Recovery is a tool that can be used from the Azure stack itself to help with the disaster recovery planning and testing. Just to give you the Microsoft spirit on this, Site Recovery provides a disaster recovery solution for on-premise machines and Azure VMs. You replicate machines from a primary location to a secondary. When disaster strikes, you fail machines over to the secondary location and access them from there. When everything's up and running normally again, you can fail machines back to recover them in the primary site. So what they're talking about there is that you can set up full replication of your environment into an Azure site and recover from there. So what that is it's a kind of fully automated Hyper-V or replication process that can cover all virtualized or certainly Hyper-V and VMware virtualization platforms, as well as physical servers themselves. It can replicate those servers into Azure, so you just need to choose what are the servers that are critical to your business. And it can be relatively quick to get those servers up and running within that Azure environment should there be any problems there. It can act as a warm standby, which means that the servers are there, they're replicated, they only need to be turned on. There's no physical building of servers, reinstalling operating systems, SQL, and then restoring your databases onto that. And they're not fully hot standby because you're not incurring the costs of running actual virtual machines or machines within Azure. All you pay for in Azure Site Recovery is the storage space that those replicated VMs take up. When you're recovering using Azure Site Recovery, you can restore to an on-premise server. So you have your replicated copy within Azure, and you can bring that back down to your on-premise servers if you have physical hardware there, or indeed a new virtualized environment that you want to recover them into. Or alternatively, you can bring those machines up within the Azure platform itself. And this allows you to be able to run all your machines as virtual machines within Azure, as if they were sitting on your local physical environment. They would have processing power, compute power, internet access, and all those tools would be in place. And one key feature of the Azure Site Recovery is the ability to run a test failover. We would recommend something like this be run on a yearly basis. And what the test failover allows you to do is to bring up all your replicated machines within what's known as a bubble environment, so that the machines within the test environment can run away as if they've been failed over. But it also allows your production environment to run away unhindered and unaffected by this test. So you can dedicate a couple of users to go through the test environment as it's brought up, make sure they can access the applications, make sure the data is up to date, run queries, various web, if there's any web interfaces, anything like that, stuff like that can all be tested within this failover test environment. And once that's completed, you simply just say, okay, test is over. It removes the test environment, but the replicated VMs that you have in place as part of your Azure Site Recovery setup are still there and have still been replicating away quite happily. So it allows that parallel run of test and live side by side, to give you the kind of the comfort and knowledge that the disaster recovery plan that you have put in place is working as expected, and you have a familiarization with the process and with how the data and applications can be accessed should there be a need to implement the recovery plan in the real world. Sorry. So Azure Site Recovery allows replication in from various sources. If you have an existing VM platform set within the Azure stack itself, you can set up ASR to replicate those machines into a secondary Azure site, and with the same features and benefits that you would have if you're doing this from on-premise. So it would be in a separate location to your production environment, and again, you would only be paying for the storage that the replicas take place. No computing power, network stuff, anything like that would not be required unless the system itself, the recovery environment itself, is brought online. You can also do replication of on-premise. So two kind of standard hypervisor platforms being Hyper-V itself, which allows obviously for an easy integration into Azure Site Recovery, as they're both sitting on Microsoft platforms, and it uses a technology based on what's called Hyper-V Replica to replicate up any changes from those VMs into the Azure ASR platform. You can also use VMware, the VMware hypervisor, to replicate in, and what happens there is that you download and install a pre-configured Windows server that acts as your ASR client for the VMware environment. It talks to VMware, pulls in all the machines, and allows that replication from the VMware environment into the ASR environment, and those machines can be brought up as if they've been replicated from anything else. Everything sitting within the ASR environment is the same, no matter where its originating platform is from. And similar to the VMware is the physical server platform. And this can work for both Linux and Windows servers. Again, an agent is put in place within your network that facilitates the transfer or replication of those physical servers into the Azure environment. And this means that all aspects of your server suite, be it virtualized, physical, in Azure, Hyper-V, VMware, can be covered by Azure Site Recovery, and all can be replicated into a single ASR environment. Then you can use those testing and failover tests to confirm that everything you require to run your business is available to you should there be a disaster, or should you have an issue where you need to fail over to your ASR environment. And that covers ASR. I'll hand you back to Joseph.
Thanks, Richard. One thing Richard didn't mention there was that recently he implemented a project for a customer where he used ASR to replicate 17 virtual machines into Azure, and that customer did a disaster recovery test. They did their failover and signed it off all successful. So that went really well. And there was multiple applications, naturally enough, across those 17 virtual machines, but that was just an example of one that Richard did recently. Just to summarize some points that you might take away to think about, there's some tools there to assist with protecting your data that we mentioned, the Azure Backup and Azure Site Recovery. I know we've probably both harped on about testing your backups. Many of you will just think we're stating the obvious, but we've seen quite a number of instances where customers only realized there was a problem when trying to recover from a disaster. We even had one case where a customer had no backups for 3 months and never realized it. And, while we helped them as best we could, they'd lost 3 months of data because, nobody was checking them, nobody was testing them. And that last point then, have the disaster recovery plan test at least annually, because you'll often find things with a disaster recovery plan, and it's when you test it, you refine it, and then hopefully it becomes very slick. Okay, just to wrap up, you can contact us on the email address listed, or contact your account manager directly for more information. When the webinar closes, a survey will pop up containing 3 questions. It would be really helpful if you could spare 2 minutes to answer these. Thank you very much for your time.